I'm curious, Cruz, like what has been your experience there? Do you see this in the Latino community where lots of folks are saying, listen, we're actually supporting this Trump approach? And if so, what's their argument? What's their perspective?
Yeah, and that's something that really motivates my research. And I'll preface by saying that Latinos are a heterogeneous, ethnic racial group, like all racial groups. They comprise multiple ethnicities, and there's so many subcultures and groups that, differentiate them. But when you look at data and when you put them into those social categories, it does show that Latinos are becoming representative of the general voter who cares about the economy, about public safety, about education.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our phenomenal sponsors like AMP America. Get the news you need to know without the corporate media bias or fluff over at ampamerica.com. Also, The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our awesome studio sponsor, Cardio Miracle. Folks, if you're looking for the best heart health supplement in the world that'll help lower your blood pressure, help that resting heart rate while also improving that pump in the gym, stick around. We're going to talk about more of that later in today's episode. But first, for today's conversation, we are digging into all things illegal immigration and why the narrative we're seeing from the corporate media might not actually reflect what boots on the ground are feeling, specifically from those folks who are really targeted in those articles and those news pieces, the Latino community. So let's go ahead and dig into that. And I can't do that conversation all by myself. So joining us today from Young Voices, Cruz Garcia. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on here. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Likewise, Cruz, likewise. And by the way, elephant in the room, peek behind the curtain for folks who are joining and playing along in the home game. You're 3 hours behind me. So we're recording here today, 11:30 on a Saturday, 8:30 bright and early over on the West Coast. So thanks for waking up and jumping on the show today. But Cruz, let's go ahead before we dig into your article that you wrote over at Real Clear Politics. And that article is why, while Trump deports undocumented immigrants, Latino voters are optimistic. There's a lot to unpack there, but Cruz, before we dig into that, do us a favor, introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience, and also let's dig into why the topic of immigration is one that you've chosen to plant your flag on from a policy perspective.
Yeah, well, as you said, I'm out here in Los Angeles. I found myself out here after because I attended the Pepperdine School of Public Policy. After attending the University of Michigan, I studied political science there, and it was there that I kind of had my academic awakening. I found that my professors were just really out of touch what so-called marginalized groups were actually experiencing. So I always wanted to be challenged in that way. I wanted to be exposed to an environment that cultivated free speech and dialogue, and that's what I found at Pepperdine. I really got an experience of two contrasting academic environments. And from there, I've always been fascinated with boots on the ground research, seeing what's really going on in the inner city. And I've been able to contribute to different think tanks on research. While I don't do research full time for political think tanks, I am full time a policy analyst for a cannabis company out here in Los Angeles. So that's how I found my sustainability living in such an expensive city.
There you go. Well, let's really quickly just pivot a little bit to something you said there in your intro, boots on the ground, right? And this is where I think a lot of this dialogue, it really does split, right? Because you have the folks who are they're in the ivory towers, right? I almost said ebony towers, the ivory towers. They're professors in academia, or they're in some think tank, or they're in some bureaucracy at the federal government where they're really isolated from seeing what's happening, to use your expression, in a boots on the ground perspective, versus the folks who are actually out in the world, living and breathing this issue from a policy prescription standpoint, but also seeing the cultural ramifications, the crime, the criminal ramifications. I mean, all that and more. That really, if you don't live in that world, you don't get to see it, right? It turns into a headline on the evening news. So it's very interesting that you're taking this really close look because it's something that you're living, breathing, seeing every single day. And this is actually something that's impacted your family. And I know in the article over at Real Clear Politics, you outline this a little bit with the story about your grandfather. So let's set the stage today. Who is the Garcia family, and maybe how this conversation impacted you and your family in your world very, very personally.
Yeah, so, I was 5 years old when my grandfather was deported. And he's actually Lozano. My Garcia side is quite different, but they both tell stories of the plight of immigrants during the 80s. And my grandfather, it was the economy during his upbringing was tough, and him not having a legal status, he found himself, succumbing to the vices of a low-income environment. He got into narcotics. I believe I grew up understanding that it was mainly marijuana. I learned that when I was about in middle school, but I'm not certain with all of his offenses. But what I do know is that he was targeted a lot. He was a babysitter for most of my, since I could remember when I was like 3 years old, babysitting me often. But it was always, we had to be on the lookout when going to the park, when going to certain areas. And I thought, my mom, her being a young mother, always telling me, oh, it's because of his immigration status. They're just, it's racial profiling. So I was really, brought up in this, with this perspective that because I'm brown, that I'm going to be racially targeted by La Migra. And that's in the article. I say that, me and my little cousins, we kind of turned it into a game and would play tag or hide and seek and, call ourselves La Migra. And, it's like the boogeyman or, so, I definitely grew up with, that notion in my head. But as I got older, and I'm actually writing another article about, public schools and during the Obama administration, but it was when I was, say, a sophomore in high school, I really began to understand the environment that I was in and the lack of law and order that was around it, and how that was the prevailing concern that I was beginning to develop. It was during a time where when the Trayvon Martin situation was going on and people were rethinking how to look at the police. And I remember thinking like, man, my grandma, she lives in the hood, as you would say. And I want, a police presence there just in case something does happen. So, when you live in those environments, you see the concerns of community members that are often not heard because they don't fit, the mainstream narrative.
Yep. Well, by the way, I mean, I lived in Philadelphia for about 7 years, and I mean, some of the areas we lived in would borderline classify as the hood, right? And like, you're spot on, man, because I didn't like playing that game. Is this gunshots or fireworks? And I also knew for a fact that as Philadelphia was a sanctuary city, that there was a lot of folks who were seeking refuge in Philadelphia, both good people, but also bad people, right? And I guess there is this, I'm going to call it a progressive left-wing liberal bias that it paints this picture that anybody who is of a minority status, be they Black, Latino, whatever it may be, that they deserve the benefit of the doubt, that even if they are considered, maybe a potentially dangerous criminal, well, maybe it's because of their circumstances where they grew up, and we just need to give them a chance. We need to change our systems. We need to change our policies to help embrace them and help give them a better life. I watched that narrative firsthand in Philadelphia crash and burn, right? Because it's not so much what you as a country can give to these people, but rather what you're going to be able to do to help protect your already law-abiding, tax-paying citizens of the country or of the city or of the locality. And you do see that when the government, the powers that be, prioritize non-citizens at the expense of the taxpayers, of the voters, of the citizens themselves, it does breed some very negative unintended consequences, which talk about unintended consequences. You'd think this narrative of, well, Trump administration, they're coming in, they're going to start enforcing immigration law. How about that? And they're going to say, hey, you're a sanctuary city. Well, sorry, that's a violation of the approach of federalism, the supremacy clause, right? So we're going to start doing our jobs. And to see that, oh man, I think that would really piss off the Latino community. And yet, this is the part that blows me away. 2024 Pew Research poll found 45% of Latinos expressed confidence in Trump's approach to immigration compared to the 39% who supported Biden's policy. I mean, that's a 6-point swing versus the pro and against, right? So that speaks to that even though these policies were aimed at almost like pacifying this preconceived notion that if we just make it easier for folks to live here, be it legally or illegally, that folks will like us more, but it's actually the exact opposite. So I'm curious, Cruz, like what has been your experience there? Do you see this in the Latino community where lots of folks are saying, listen, we're actually supporting this Trump approach? And if so, what's their argument? What's their perspective?
Yeah, and that's something that really motivates my research. And I'll preface by saying that Latinos are a heterogeneous, ethnic racial group, like all racial groups. They comprise multiple ethnicities, and there's so many subcultures and groups that, differentiate them. But when you look at data and when you put them into those social categories, it does show that Latinos are becoming representative of the general, voter who cares about the economy, about public safety, about education. So Latinos in that way have really assimilated to, value those things that, say, a typical American would value. And I would go as far to say, you pointed out the poll from Pew. There's also, this past election, we see counties that have never, Latino majority counties that have never voted red before, vote red for the first time. And, to emphasize that, these are counties that are impacted by immigration. You have Starr County and Maverick County in Texas that are along the southern border, and you have Riverside County and San Bernardino County out here in Los Angeles. So, and I'm in Los Angeles, and the political culture is very motivated by the Latino civil rights movement. But you're seeing like that culture valued, but also an understanding for the necessity of,
Hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle? And how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So, by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show.
Evidence-based reasons for policy solution, having increased police presence, buffer zones, making sure that there's distances from encampments, to schools. Those are Latinos and immigrant communities that are pushing, those policies and that are showing up to city council meetings and, talking before council and expressing themselves. I saw a part of my job, is for my cannabis company is watching city council meetings. And, I don't want to say the city, but one of the cities that I was watching, it was just like, it was such a traditional, conservative Latino community. And I'm not saying I'm, the supporter of, conservative communities. I'm pretty libertarian myself, but, the community was so conservative and the council members were so receptive to what they were hearing. So I just, really think, communities like that need to remain intact because they have something, so great to offer.
Yeah, well, and listen, from a from a messaging standpoint, right? It does have so much more of an impact when you see the folks who are, I mean, in this case, really primarily impacted by policy or the lack thereof, right? The ones who are actually voicing concerns versus, and this is what we've seen here in America, anytime the whites engage in a conversation about immigration policy, right? It's always like, oh, well, if you're not in favor of a more, inclusive immigration policy, you must be racist, right? And this just really takes the wind out of those sails. It turns it much more into a conversation about the specific policy and the aftermath of these policies, both positives and negatives, versus just, superficially painting that anybody who challenges the narrative is a racist, right? And this is where I think a lot of folks, especially on the more, we'll just say the conservative right, the moderate right, I think the more common sense approach to politics really took a stance this past election cycle. Like they looked at the discrepancy between the Trump administration and what they were going to be promoting and the potential Kamala Harris administration. And the contrast was quite clear, right? Like lots of folks looked at that and said, sorry, no, we watched for the past 4 years as millions of folks poured over the southern border, both Latinos and non-Latinos, right? It's folks coming from all over the world, Chinese immigrants, Haitian immigrants, folks from the African countries. Like, what are we doing here? And this is where so many folks are to say, time out. I'm not a bad person for asking questions. I'm not a bad person for noticing that literally millions of people have flooded over our borders and now are taking over our large cities in America and also living here in many cases at the expense of the taxpayer. Meanwhile, my roads are crumbling. My bridges are crumbling or literally falling down. If you're talking about the Francis Scott Key Bridge over in Maryland, right? We're watching as our airplanes are crashing into each other in the sky or trying to land and falling apart or flipping over on runways. We're watching all these issues take place and we're told, sorry, we don't have the money. Sorry, we can't help you here, right? And I know for the average person, they hear that and they say, and earmuffs for the kids at home, they say, that's bullshit. Sorry, I'm calling it out for what it is. You can't keep gaslighting me, telling me that the sky is green when I'm looking at it saying, no, it's blue. And this is why so many folks, I think across the board, Cruz, both, the folks in the larger voting public, both Republicans and Democrats started to coalesce on this 80-20 issue. But surprisingly, a lot of the folks who I think there was this preconceived notion that, well, if you're a Latino, you're not going to be in favor of reforming immigration policy. And yet the exact opposite is what we're seeing here come to fruition today.
Oh, completely. It reminds me of a moment that I had at the University of Michigan. It was my freshman year, and we were reading Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow. I was, pretty young at the time, and I don't remember, the entirety of the book, but I do remember having a conversation where I just realized how gaslit, the University of Michigan made me feel. And I bring it up because I do have, good mentors that I've had and friends that I've made at the University of Michigan, but my goodness, it's like, the white people there, it's a progressive environment and they really do gaslight minorities into, just restricting their ability to think critically on topics like that. Like we were reading the New Jim Crow, and there was a section where they were trying to pin the elders of a community as snitches because they would do like neighborhood watches. I remember the conversation, and I don't remember the specific part in the book, but I remember talking in the class about how the elders of, minority communities, when they develop relationships with police, that it's like a force of like a sense of like being an Uncle Tom or, being a sellout and to me, that was just like, I'm around a class full of white students and they're having me believe that, community leaders that are connected with the police are supposed to be these, the enemy of me. So, it's instant like gaslighting like that from the academic standpoint that cultivates a group of young people, who go out into the workforce, who see, who have those social cues to deflect from, having critical conversations or looking at something, with pragmatic research back behind it, because they've been cultivated in a society as such. So I'm excited with, I'm a critical of Trump, but I can, definitely acknowledge, the good things that he's doing. And one of them is the revitalization of merit in society. And to me, and what's important to me is in academia, because we can have these conversations. We can get into the nitty gritty about what law and order looks like and how it should be implemented. It's also interesting because I'm also concerned with, with being lumped in together with, violent criminals. I think another good thing that Trump is doing is that he's talking to the Latino community. He named a wildlife center off of after Jocelyn Nungare, so and which is so beautiful to me. I mean, you have wildlife growing in your memory, like that's, to me, just amazing. And the fact that Trump can distinguish, what pro-family Latino communities are compared to, foreign actors that, there's speculation that they've been planted here. That distinguishment is important to the Latino community. And the fact that he does that, we want to be at, the table when it comes to issues like this, because we understand and we see, narrow-based policies from, the progressive standpoint that are intended to help Latino communities and Black communities. They often have negative impacts, and it's important for individuals from those communities to point it out and to not be afraid to have a platform and say, your talk looks nice, but in actuality, the erosion of standards, from the Obama administration, that is, the ramifications are so strong for Black and Latino youth because of that. So it's policies like that are intended to help, a narrow base of constituents that end up, hurting, all Americans. And I would never want to be a part of, a policy that it's like, it's to help you, but, we're going to instead, drag a whole bunch of people down because, this is a experimental policy that, that sounds good. So,
well, and we, by the way, I'm going to interrupt, Cruz, but like, this is why we've seen over the past few years, right, the narrative of what we've been promoted by the left crumble, and then the real life consequences of those narratives actually coming to fruition. You look at Laken Riley, right? I think it was Georgia University. I think she was a junior or something like that when she was out going for a run, gets attacked by an illegal immigrant from, I think, Venezuela it was, and gets violently beaten and murdered by this immigrant. And that narrative, right, of, well, that's an exception to the rule. No. Anybody who has a functioning cerebral cortex can look at that and say, no, I don't care if she's a white kid, a Black kid, a Latino kid, that could be my kid, right? Mm-hmm. And this shouldn't be happening. And it turns into things like the Laken Riley Act, where all of a sudden you have a very large base of folks who are pushing their representatives to say enough, right? I don't want to watch as Americans are being sacrificed at the support of quite literal illegal aliens who are coming to our country and then violating our laws, right? And I always hear this narrative from folks who are much more in the open borders camp of like, well, illegal immigrants commit less crime than your average person. And I'm like, they shouldn't be here in the first place. Like it's like you have a guy come over to your house. He's a good buddy of yours and he's hanging out, and then just one of his friends just comes in and starts trashing the place. It's like, hold on, I invited my friend in, not his friend, and now his friend's here destroying my place. Sorry, I should be able as the landlord or the homeowner to say no and to call that out for what it is, not to be gaslit to say you're a bad person for not letting this guy come in because it's cold outside. He needs to be inside today because it's a chilly day. And then what? He's going to destroy my home? No. And that is, I mean, it's a very gross analogy, but like when you fast forward to where we are today, we're seeing that take place right now. That is the narrative, or at least the mindset behind a lot of folks more on that open borders camp. So when you look at things like the Laken Riley Act, Cruz, I'm curious, do you think that is a step towards sanity? Like, do you think that we're starting to come out of this gaslit, idealistic mentality from the progressives and the leftists and the open border folks who, they want to sing kumbaya in one global, social order, and actually going back towards an idea that, hey, I'm an American, I have national pride, we're building it on meritocracy and shared values, and hey, we have rules, and if you don't like those rules, don't come here. Are we getting back more towards that mentality? What do you see?
Yeah, and I definitely think we are getting back towards that mentality. I think with social media, with Elon Musk allowing such a free platform where there's transparency of what goes on in the community, you're definitely having constituents seeing and experiencing the strife of mass immigration, and majority of them being men 20 to 30 years old with speculation of past crimes. We know how these rogue countries act when it comes to what they do with their criminals. But also mentioned like Lake and Riley, Jocelyn Ungare. She was a Latina who was killed in Texas by an illegal immigrant, and these stories are important, because growing up around illegal immigrants, and my family being Latino and being in a Latino community, you know it raises the spectacle of like unsolved cases of a different judicial process because of the illegal status. It's much harder to investigate crimes when somebody is undocumented. I mean, honestly, like just last week, my little cousin Toriano was killed in a homicide, and his
I'm so sorry.
investigation is, well, thank you. His investigation is still pending. We don't know who the perpetrator is. And, really quick, my cousin Vicky, Talia, Selena, and Juan, I love you guys. And, it's so unfortunate that his young life was taken so quick, because he was such an amazing person. So in situations like that, it's a crisis. It really does feel like a crisis for the inner city community when you have, a distressed environment already, but complement that with weak immigration laws that brings unsafe people who encourage crime, in the community. The inner city already has a severe problem with unsolved cases, with Black and brown victims of homicide and abuse, going completely unsolved. So there's this idea that that it only matters when it's the white perpetrator, but when you're in a situation where the perpetrator is the same skin color as you, it doesn't matter at all. So I think it's much harder to gaslight. It's much harder for politicians to have propagandistic messages. So I think the left is going to have to is really go into their toolkit with coming up with good arguments. I mean, you see Gavin Newsom, he's doing a podcast, and he's acting like he is center. But overall, I mean, with social media, and with this like freedom of information coming from so many different avenues, it's going to be harder for politicians to use the same tactics that they used on Black and Latino communities, because we're pretty savvy when it comes to social media and keeping up with the news.
So, Cruz, we're going to end towards the tail end of the conversation here, but you did mention something that really it sparked something. I want to have your opinion, or at least your sales pitch outlined here, because you mentioned you're a libertarian, or at least libertarian leading, right? And we see Dave Smith and Alex Narasha from the Cato Institute. They're going to be having a debate here, I think, in the next few weeks on the idea of a more open borders mentality from a libertarian perspective, and a more we'll say closed national border perspective from Dave Smith. And I see this a lot. I'm a libertarian, and I see it in all the libertarian groups. This is a civil war that's still taking place. Open borders versus not so much closed borders, just a common sense approach to borders. And I see a lot of the folks in the more open borders camp. I mean, they will go back to the books. They will go back to the philosophy. They'll go back to the principles, and they just lead with that. And they don't really apply it to the real world. At least that's my perspective. But to those folks in the more libertarian open border camp, make the sale, right? Like, make the pitch to them. Why are they missing some stuff here? And from your true, again, boots on the ground perspective, help them see things that they are not seeing.
Yeah. So, I mean, all this to say, I'm not an immigration expert. I do write about it from the outsider perspective. And I know that there's even talk about, Blackwater and, coming up with an immigration budget, or I don't necessarily know how that would work out, enforcing immigration from the private sector. But what I will say is that, when it comes to immigration, there is a really big security concern involved. And I know, I'm not for a police state. I'm not for, ICE to just come in and raid communities. That's not what I'm for at all. I'm for local solution-based, conversations. And so I would, all that to say is, when it comes to the free markets, we need to recognize that it's not the same immigration wave as it was when my grandparents came during the 60s, the 70s, and what the Bush administration was trying to during the early 2000s. This is a different wave of immigrants. The majority of them are men. They're not families. Those coming from the southern border, there's a relaxed rule of law. They don't have the same ambition and this isn't to say all of them, but certainly with what has been, researched, and from that, it's not women and children like it was years before. So I think in this situation, it would be a matter of prioritizing safety, seeing what the local communities want to do, and give it more, allow states to work with, ICE immigration as opposed to just, having this draconian immigration enforcement. And I would also say, I know it's only Trump's second month in office, but he hasn't deported that many immigrants. They're really, to me, they're doing a lot of the groundwork as seeing let's root out the ones that are really bad. Let's root out the ones that are causing all the problems in the community. That, let's work with local authorities and see where the areas that have gotten the most complaints from residents, that have, had, speculations. I mean, if you just go to a Chicago City Council meeting, I mean, you can just, see what they're saying. But overall, there has to be a law and order approach to illegal immigration. And then once, there's some reform going on, we can start talking about, okay, what do we need in terms of labor, high skilled labor, low skilled, because the conversation involves so many different aspects of the economy. And I don't have enough information on it, but I'm also hearing from the conservative side too, that it's like, no, those are American jobs. And, I don't know enough about it, but I just know that there's a really big security concern that needs to be addressed.
And listen, this is where I have been battling my good friends on the libertarian side for quite a while, which, by the way, I am a libertarian. So I put that out there first. But we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time and not get drunk on our own I guess, policy prescriptions here, right? Because it is one thing for us to sit together in our little groups and talk about how great things could be if everybody was living by libertarian principles and values and philosophies. Yeah, the world would be a lot better of a place if everybody lived by the mentality of don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. But that's not reality, right? That's not how real life works. There are absolutely good people who are going to abide and live by those rules. But guess what? For every one of those folks, there is going to be somebody out there who says, oh, well, I'm going to go out and hurt people and take their stuff. And we have to be able to acknowledge that. We have the ideal. We want to enforce or at least promote the ideas of don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. But we have to be able to then have means to stop the folks who are going to hurt people and take their stuff. That's not me being unprincipled. That's me applying our ideas to the real world. And just elephant in the room, libertarians, if your ideas can't actually stand in the real world and actually convince people and show value, then your ideas are goofball. This is the stuff we talk about with our silly friends on the left who are in the communist camp, right? Well, if everybody lived by our communist standards, well, they won't, right? Because I'm not going to share half of everything I earn to the rest of the society because communal justice. No, none of that stuff. Stop it. And that's where libertarians, I think, more often have lost the mark. And by the way, this is why for the past 6 years, I've been trying to teach libertarians how to sell their ideas in a common sense way that meets people where they're at on the issues they care about, not through, hey, this book is really great. Read this book and you'll understand why. That doesn't sell. That just annoys people. That pushes people away. So the fact that we are having a very real and yes, sometimes tough conversation about very real issues that are impacting very real people, that's important. And that's exactly how, if libertarians want to win
they are going to win. Now, I'm going to, for my final thought today, I'm going to maybe do a little bit of a poke at somebody in the libertarian movement, because I had a little spat on Twitter, Twitter. Karen Ann Harlos, I think she's the secretary of the Libertarian Party or something. She used to be. I don't remember what her title is. She told me winning is not a strategy. And I kind of sit back and I laughed, because I'm saying, listen, Karen Ann, because she was arguing that libertarians need to be libertarian, like big L libertarians need to be philosophical, 100% pure libertarians. They have to live by the bylaws. And I'm like, Karen Ann, that's not a sales strategy. That's you having a social club and setting rules for people to get in. And I said, good luck winning. She says, well, winning's not a strategy. It's like, well, then what are we doing? Are we playing politics, right? Are we being goofballs in our own little goofball groups and trying to argue about who's the most pure goofball? If that's the case, fine, go do that. But just understand that I'm out. Lots of other folks who are more common sense, like realistic libertarians, are going to be out. And by the way, the larger public who's not libertarian, or at least do not identify as a libertarian, they're going to look at you as a goofball and not even pay attention. Like, we libertarians are going to pay attention because it's our name, right? We're libertarians. But the other folks out there in the real world, they're going to shut down. They're going to say, this is goofball. You're completely ignoring what's actually happening right now in pursuit of pushing your perfect ideology, pushing your perfect values. And that does not sell. So to folks like Karen Ann, sure, go live by your bylaws. I'll go live in the real world. Cruz, that's my final thoughts for today. What do you have for us on your end as we wrap things up?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I do identify as a libertarian. I'm not, the Ayn Randian faithful libertarian that, some people, are. And I have gotten heat for it, but I mean, I think that's the cool thing about being a libertarian is that, you can be an advocate of small government and still question, a lot of things that go on in the policy world. I'm a free speech absolutist, and, my mind is constantly changing, and, but one thing that I'm going to be truthful to is, the investigation of truth. And I do think that libertarians, they have that about them, and I hope it remains that way, and that people are accepting to the group, and that people don't get pushed out. But it was wonderful being able to talk about this. It was a great conversation. I'm actually motivated to write more after this conversation, so you did your job. And
love it. Awesome, man. Well, how about this? We want folks to go ahead and read whatever you're inspired today to go and write in the future. So where can folks go ahead, reach out to you, follow you on social media if they want to see what's coming next from Cruz Garcia? And where can they go ahead and check out this article that we were talking about today?
Yeah, so my article is on Real Clear Politics. Latino voters are optimistic about Trump's approach to immigration, and they can follow my subscribe to my Substack. It's at Cruz Garcia, The Enlightened.
Love it. Awesome. And folks, we'll make sure we include those links in the show notes. And by the way, Cruz is joining us today from the amazing team over at Young Voices. I have been a big fan of Young Voices for many a year now. Our good buddy Caleb Franz still fighting the good fight, bringing young conservative and libertarian writers to the table, getting them on platforms that millions of folks have access to, like Real Clear Politics. So it is really cool to see the younger generation, which, by the way, helped us win here in this past election cycle, mind you. So the fact that the younger generation is active, they are writing, they are getting involved, and dare I say, we're winning. So with that being said, Cruz, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you to the amazing team at Young Voices. And with that being said, folks, if you got some value from today's episode, do me a favor, go ahead and give today's episode a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever it is you spend time for social medias, or if you're watching us on your favorite video platform like YouTube, Rumble, or on Twitter or on Facebook, do me a favor, head down below into the comments. Let us know your thoughts. Do you agree with Cruz's perspective and yours truly here on the Brian Nichols Show, or are you much more in the open borders camp? Go ahead, have the battle down in the comments. Let us know your thoughts. And of course, if you are in fact going ahead and following us over the video platforms, hit that subscribe button as well so you don't miss a single time we have a brand new episode go live. And of course, the Brian Nichols Show is a podcast, so you can go ahead and find it on all your audio podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and anywhere you get your podcasts. I like Podcast Addict. I know other folks, they like their own different podcasting tool. So wherever it is, you can go ahead and find the Brian Nichols Show. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and put a pin in today's conversation. Cruz, this has been an absolutely fantastic chat. And thank you folks for joining us today. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Cruz Garcia. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.